Hi, everybody. It's another small grains for craft, uh, small grains for brewing and distilling, or small grains for craft beverages happy hour on Friday afternoon. It's nice and bright and snowy here in Michigan. This week we have Dr. Stephen Bertman from Western Michigan University, who's going to be presenting about how climate change will affect brewing and also distilling industries moving forward. And we'll also hear some updates about the joint collaborative Sustainable Brewing Program between KVCC, Kalamazoo Valley Community College, and Western Michigan University, which also happens to be my alma mater. So without further ado, Steve, if you want to take it away, let's go.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Ryan and Brian, for giving me this chance. I, um, I am technically an organic chemist, an atmospheric chemist, but very concerned about climate change. And I put together a presentation for the Craft Brewers Conference last year that I didn't actually get to present in person, but did virtually. And so the slides that I'm going to show you, I put together for that audience. And so I apologize if all of most of what I'm going to show is new to you, but review is always useful, I think. Um, so I wanted to start by just drawing the distinction between climate change and global warming, um, because often those two terms get confused and misused, especially on the political stage. They are not synonyms. They're not the same. One is a symptom and the other is a driver. So climate change, all of the various changes that we see in our climate are driven by trapping more heat in our Earth system. Um, and so probably the simplest way to see that is by looking at what we know about global temperature and from the past. So this is a video put together by NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Science that shows global temperature around the world in this contour from the beginning of the thermometer record up to the present day. And the colors represent deviations in temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, sorry about that, relative to the mid 30 years of the 20th century. So blue colors are white is exactly the same temperature as that mid part of the 20th century. Blue is colder. Yellows and reds are warmer. So red is about 4 degrees warmer. Dark blue is about 4 degrees cooler. And so what we can see is we're going to step through this 5-year averages 1 year at a time, starting at 1880. So the 5-year period between 1880 and 1884. What you can see already here is that most of the planet was cooler than the mid 20th century average, although temperature is not uniform. I guess that's pretty obvious to most of us. Temperature is not uniform in the world. So West Africa was particularly warm during this 5-year period. Most of North America, especially Canada, was significantly cooler. So I'm going to start this video now, and it steps through pretty quickly. You can see up into the 20s, now we're approaching World War II, was cooler. Most of the so this is now the mid part of the 20th century. Now we're getting into the latter half and now the 21st century. This is data of actual thermometer records recorded all over the world since 1880. And since 1900, global temperatures have increased about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree Celsius. Clearly the planet has warmed, but it hasn't warmed uniformly all over the planet. The North Pole, the Arctic, has warmed significantly more than mid latitudes, and that has significant implications for the global climate. In that it's changing the amount of Arctic sea ice, and therefore the amount of radiation that is reflected back into space. But there can be no doubt that the planet has warmed since the industrial age. Here's another way of looking at similar data. This is global average temperature anomalies, again, relative to the mid part of the 20th century. The last time that the Earth's temperature was lower than that 20th century average was in 1976. That means that anyone born after 1976, which is most, if not all, of my students who are in college now and poised to enter the workforce and be the leaders of the future, have ever experienced a year at or below the mid 20th century average. This warming, climate, of course, has changed over the years, over the millennia, over the millions of years of the planet. This warming that we're experiencing now is faster than any time in the last 800,000 years when we have proxy measures of temperature. And virtually all of that global warming is due to humans increasing greenhouse gas concentrations primarily through two main mechanisms. Combustion of fossil fuels is responsible for about 80%. And deforestation approximately the other 20%. So those two major activities are responsible for that global warming. And of those gases, of course, CO2 is the most important, responsible for about 64% of global warming. And this is the famous Keeling curve of CO2 concentrations measured at the top of the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii since the 1950s. So these are actual instrument measurements. We have very precise measurements of CO2 concentrations. The sort of wiggly red trace shows the seasons of the planet, with mostly in the northern hemisphere, of plants taking CO2 out of the air for photosynthesis and putting them back in during respiration in the off season. At the main point, I put a couple markers on here. In one generation, we have seen a 15% increase in the concentration of CO2 as a proxy for greenhouse gases. So we know very precisely, at least, how much of these gases that we have put into the atmosphere. One thing that is sort of a little disconcerting to me when I looked at the data. So this graph shows cumulative CO2 emissions by year superimposed on a trace of world population. And so the red is the integration of CO2 emissions prior to the 21st century, and the blue is the integration of CO2 concentration or CO2 emissions emitted in the 21st century. Half of all of the greenhouse gases that we have emitted into the atmosphere have been emitted in the 21st century. when most, if not all of my students were born. So we are all complicit in this. And it's not just a legacy. We are right now putting way too much greenhouse gases into the atmosphere to be sustainable. So global warming is happening and it's causing climate change. And when I first started working on this stuff a couple decades ago, we had to rely more heavily on predictions of what will happen if we continue down this path. Now we don't have to rely on predictions because we have observations that those predictions are largely coming true. And there are a number of consequences of the climate change that are of particular concern to people who are interested in brewing, distilling, the craft beverage industry, or the alcoholic beverage industry at all. First, changes in temperature. So we're expecting and we're starting to see more extreme heat and warmer and drier summers. We're seeing changes in precipitation patterns. We're seeing reduced snowpack in places that rely on that for their fresh water supply. We're seeing significantly more drought around the country and the world. At the same time, we're seeing more intense storms leading to more flooding. We're seeing shifts in the growing season, increased growing season length. We're seeing elevated carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere that will affect photosynthesis. And we're seeing changes in ranges of pests and pathogens. So all of these consequences of climate change are of concern to, I think, the brewing industry. And I want to just go through some of the specific results. All of these are publicly available data. Most of them come from our National Climate Assessment Report, our most recent National Climate Assessment Report. So most of the data that I'm going to show are specifically for the US. Annual temperature has increased in the latter half of this period relative. So this is temperature. These maps show temperature differences relative to the same locations relative to the first 60 years of the 20th century. So most of the country has warmed, but the warming is not distributed equally. And in particular, we're seeing warmer winters, more warming in the winter than in the summer, which leads to less snowfall, more rainfall that changes the distribution of water over the course of a growing season. We're seeing increases in the frequency of intense heat. So this graph shows that we're seeing more record daily highs than we did in the beginning of the 20th century. So extreme temperatures are predicted, and we're starting to see that those are increasing even more than the averages. So when we have episodes of intense heat. At the same time, we're seeing increased frequency of droughts and increased severity of droughts. So this map shows the number of weeks that these areas were in drought over I guess pretty much over the calendar year 2020. And you see there are certain places sort of centered around the Four Corners area out west that were in drought, officially in significant drought for the entire year. So this is of course important for for the risk of fire out in California, but it's also significantly important for agriculture when the Central Valley of California, or the breadbasket of the country, is in drought. The entire country suffers for that. We're already seeing increase in growing season length, measured as the length of frost-free season. So the National Climate Assessment Report divides the country into different regions. So the Midwest region has seen on average an increase of 9 days of this growing season. Out in the Pacific Northwest, it's more like 2 weeks. And the projections, assuming that we continue doing business as usual, are for changes of growing season on the order of a month, maybe even a month and a half. So significantly different. Precipitation changes we're seeing differ by region and by season. So in the Midwest, we're seeing increased precipitation, in particular in the summer and in the spring. Out west in the Pacific Northwest, where most of the hops are grown, we're seeing more potentially heavy precipitation in the springtime, leading to spring flooding, and less precipitation in the summer during the heat of the growing season. So again, what are the impacts of this? More rain, less snow, a smaller snowpack again, so less buffer or less storage of water for the summer season. More drought in the summer, and if you believe the predictions, tens of billions of dollars of crop loss are estimated. What is particularly troubling is that this precipitation is coming, increased precipitation is coming in the form of extreme events. So, you know, 100-year flood is now happening every 20 years. On average, in some places even more frequently than that. And so and the Midwest is particularly so far the worst, is seeing the worst of that. More of the rain coming in intense events, 42% increase in the amount of precipitation occurring in the heaviest 1% of events. What this does, of course, so it's not just the total amount of rain, which total amount of precipitation, which integrated over, if you remember a couple slides ago, integrated over the whole season isn't that great of a change. But when it comes all at once, there's limited capacity to withstand or to store that water, and so you get some of these huge flooding events that we've seen in the last couple of years. So these changes differ by region, lead to flooding and erosion. And of concern for the agricultural industry, of course, is when can you plant, and what can you plant to withstand the changes in precipitation that we're seeing. And this extreme behavior is predicted to become much more common. These are results of 2 different climate change scenarios. The one on the right is what we call business as usual. And that is, we don't do anything about our energy infrastructure, and we continue emitting greenhouse gases at the same rate as we are now. And the one on the left showing significantly less impact is a lower scenario that has us switching over to renewable energy sources sooner. So I'm not a farmer or an agronomist, but I just want to present some data that I found in the literature that describe some of the impacts that these changes due to global warming might have. Crops grown under elevated CO2 can grow faster. Some crops can grow faster, but the amount of available nutrient doesn't change when there's more CO2. And so the protein content of most crops goes down when grown under elevated CO2. And this graph shows that the amount of change will vary from crop to crop. That legumes like soybeans that fix their own nitrogen compensate so they can fix more nitrogen. Their protein content doesn't change as much, but barley is predicted to decrease protein content 13 to 18% grown under elevated CO2. Some modeling of barley cultivation under global warming or future climate predictions show decreases in barley yield by the end of the century, primarily due to extreme heat and drought. So anywhere from 3 to 17% decrease in barley yields globally. More in some places than others. So barley is susceptible to heat and to drought. And this study shows that the combination of the two is even worse than either one separately. But in both cases, the seed weight of these different strains of barley, which I assume you guys understand, but I don't know the difference between Bowman and Crystal. But what is a common result is that yields decrease when they experience heat and drought. 95% decrease when subjected to both. And not all strains respond identically. So I think that there's some opportunities here to breed strains that may be more resistant or maybe more resilient to changes more resilient to increased intense heat and drought episodes. Hops similarly show a decrease in their properties under drought conditions. And here the difference in varieties is actually quite striking. So this is a change in cone yield after being subject to drought conditions. Look at Willamette had the highest yield under the control conditions and almost no yield under the drought conditions. And the alpha beta acid contents also are affected and not affected universally across all strains. So again, I think there's some opportunities for selective breeding or at least features that should be taken into account when deciding what strains to plant. And so different hop varieties also show different levels of heat tolerance. So, you know, these, at least in my hands, I haven't been able to find too much more data in the open literature, in the peer-reviewed literature, about the ability of these crops to withstand some of the changes and some of the work. I know that it's starting to ramp up, but I think there's room for lots more work to think about ways to position the brewing, distilling industries, to position them so that they can withstand some of these predictions, some of the changes that we are already experiencing and we expect to see increase in intensity over the next couple decades as a result of climate change. So what are take-home lessons? Climate is going to become warmer and less predictable. It's hard to say how brewing practices will be challenged specifically, but we know that they will be. We didn't even talk about the impacts of on water quality as well as of water availability. I probably should have added this in, but I didn't. But there is enough variability in the traits of the strains that, at least that have been studied so far, of barley and hops, that there are some opportunities for producing varieties that may withstand these threats better than others. So the work's started, but there's lots of room for more. And I think that climate change is as good of a motivator for looking at these things as any. I think that this is my personal opinion, that collaboration, in terms of collaboration with between brewers and distillers and growers, is going to be key for the craft industry as a whole to develop resiliency. And I think that it's important to make friends with Canadians, because that's where the barley cultivation is sort of going, I think. Then I will now cede the floor to my colleague, Brian Lindberg, to talk about our program.
All right, thanks, Steve. Brian, you ready to go?
Yeah, did we want to do questions before or
Oh,
after?
yeah. Yes, absolutely.
I just
So
don't want to, I don't want to detour.
good call, Brian.
Yeah,
so I have a couple questions for Steve in the chat. So the first couple come from Ned. He wants to know, when you're talking about record low temperatures, does that mean record higher daily low temperatures? Exactly, like, I guess, define record low temperatures in that context.
Yeah, so I think I think they usually do a daily average when they, or some time period, they average some time period when they're measuring that low record low temperature.
Gotcha. And then the second one from Ned is, please define what constitutes an extreme weather event.
Well, the way that the data were presented, it's the frequent the amount of rain that falls, the frequency of events that, well, yeah, I'm not sure exactly how an extreme event is defined, but it's, it's an event that is some probably a standard deviation away from the mean for rain events. So a rain event produces a certain amount of moisture, and there's a distribution, and an extreme event is probably 1 or 2 standard deviations away from the mean. That would be my guess. But that, you know, if you think about the total average precipitation change for most of the country, it is not all that different, especially averaged over the entire year. But more of that rain is coming in fewer rain events. And so
Right.
necessarily each event is dropping more rain than used to happen.
Yeah, that's the direction my thoughts were going on. That is looking at the shape of distribution, not just the overall trend, but the shape of distribution, like what percentage of total annual rainfall is happening within X amount of days and X amount of events.
Right.
Yeah, stats though, like, yeah, the devil's in the details, statistics. And then I think that's it as far as questions directly related to your presentation, but just a comment from Brooke I want to read off is that as an agroecologist and farmer, Brooke is seeing winter barley as a more suitable crop for extreme weather conditions that we're seeing when compared with corn, soybeans, or spring barley even. So a small ray of sunshine for winter barley there.
So can I ask an ignorant question? Is winter barley a different variety?
So
or is it just barley planted in the winter?
Yeah, pretty much. So there's 2 different growth habits for barley and many small grains. So planting in the fall and then allowing overwintering, so accompanying dormancy over the winter, and then spring emergence. So we found it's a great way to shortcut not being able to get out and plant early enough with spring barley. And for a number of reasons, it fits really well with our cropping systems in Michigan. And as you move south, like down into Ohio, where Tom's at there, winter barley is a much better option over spring. So
I would add, Ryan, too, that summer droughts seem to be not less likely. Even though we're getting more total summer precipitation, we're also getting more periods without any rain, which is really hard on the summer crops in our, you know, with marginal soils. And so competing on a national or regional basis as corn and soybeans take hold and move into traditional barley producing areas of the upper Midwest, and we're sitting here with more droughts and less corn and soybean yields than some of those other places, but we can grow more barley and wheat or other winter grains than anywhere else in the country, really. So maybe excluding Idaho and Washington, but it just seems like a great opportunity, an unfortunate opportunity, but an opportunity nonetheless.
yeah, interesting too. So corn and soybeans pushing farther up into the plains provinces of Canada is actually bringing disease pressure with it too. So DON, aka vomitoxin, like the notorious mycotoxin produced by Fusarium. Fusarium wasn't really, from what I've heard, Fusarium wasn't really an issue in Canada in the past, but is becoming more so because corn's a really primary vector for it. So there's a lot of consequences surrounding changing climate zones and pushing ag in places where it formerly hasn't been.
Thanks, Steve. It interests me just based on, again, that blind optimism and Brooke piping in on opportunity, adaptation for survival. So you're going to have the Eastern Europe centralized marketplace, the Northwest US, North America centralized marketplace, and what you're seeing is then a regional shift to a more local marketplace. So it's going to be markets that what the interesting thing is, as we've all studied those barley maps as barley swept across North America, and then now it's going to sweep back to a demand-based regional economy. Yeah, so I can see how in contrast this variability shows that we have potential for maintaining a market, but in new locations. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I thought there was this, I always feel overwhelmed with climate change, and you've seen your presentation before, and in public radio or what have you, it's always feels like a downer. And I feel like that our global survival is the critical issue, but here we are growing barley for beer, and I see there is an opportunity, and I wanted to make sure we saw it on the map. The data showed that there is actually an opportunity. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. And I guess I would say, there are two ways to respond to climate change, right? Mitigation and adaptation. And, the debate between, how much resources to put towards one or the other is going to, hopefully that's where we're going to, the debate will head, right? Where we actually make decisions about how to respond to this. But there's no question that I think I tried to show that things have already changed. And so we have to adapt just to the change that we already have and that's already in the pipeline, while we continue to try to mitigate future changes. And so, being aware of what those changes are and how they are distributed, and how they are going to affect various specific parts of the economy, I think is key to adapting our economy to make it resilient and sustainable, at least in the short term. So yeah, I totally agree that we should be looking at what are the ways we can take advantage of knowing, at least being able to predict what's going to happen and adapt.
Yeah, one quick thing about the shift in accumulated protein due to elevated CO2 levels. So especially with spring barley, but even with winter barley, we want low protein and high starch content. But besides that, that's the impacts on food security and the quality of nutrient-rich crops that we're able to grow and provide to the public is a whole nother animal there. So I think there's some it's a kind of a downer too, as Michael said, as far as that goes. So my concerns about malting quality, in my mind, pale in comparison to the relative quality of food being produced off that land.
I always ask Brooke, I forget which, that because there's less acid rain or been less of that as a problem, there's the additive that folks are needing to supply again. What is that? Sulfur. That's it. Thank you. Just again, there's a change that we adapted to, but it was for the positive in this sense.
All right. Unless anybody has any more questions for Steve, we can revisit later too if we want. I'd like to hear from Brian about the brewery there. Got some activity going on, some people cleaning it up after a brew day, it looks like.
Yeah, you guys actually caught us at a really good time. We are just wrapping up a brew day here in Kalamazoo. So a little background on what we do here. Kalamazoo Valley Community College, about 6 years ago, we partnered with Western Michigan University to install a brewing program. And why we kind of decided to talk about sustainability is that's really what we try to key in on, is not only brewing practices, but how we can do it in a more sustainable way, whether that be environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, or even social sustainability. And that's one thing that we think really makes us different, is how can we be better, not for today, but also in the future, and also in constantly changing markets. We've seen a huge change in the last year in how we make beer and how we distribute beer. And so, it's kind of looking to the future and how we can be the best. Behind me, this is our little brew system. We have a 1 hectoliter, so 100 liter advanced brewery from Germany. It's an Esau and Hubert system. There's a full mash tun, lauter tun, boil kettle whirlpool combination, and a heat exchanger, just like you would see at a pretty major brewery, just shrunk down about 200 times smaller. And some really nifty things that we do have on this. We have some water recovery, like most breweries, but we are one of the few breweries here in the States that actually utilizes a variaboil that allows us to boil under a vacuum, essentially lowering the boiling temperature of our liquids and conserving electrical energy that way from our heating systems. So we have some cool little built-in things that students can experiment with when they're in here brewing. A little bit about our program. We really emphasize grain to glass. So we have about 33 or 34 credits dedicated solely to brewing. So they come in, they learn kind of the essentials of home brewing. We go into an 8-week course diving deep into the main ingredients, 2 weeks of water chemistry, 2 weeks of malting, 2 weeks of hops. From there, we jump into hot side operations, cold side aeration, or cold side operations, the biology and chemistry of brewing, and then we even get up to packaging and quality control. As a final part of our program, we utilize this brewery right behind me, and the students come in, they make whatever recipes they want. Sometimes I reel them in a little bit so that they don't get too crazy, but we really let them have their artistic approach on the beers and try to see what they can do. About a year ago, we were approved to make our brewery a full-fledged brewery that we can actually sell our student beer. And so now, if you're in Kalamazoo area and you want to try a couple pints, you're able to come here to campus and try beers that were designed and brewed and packaged by our students. And we think that's a really important thing in the whole process of education. It's not only making it and understanding the science behind it, but getting feedback from customers and your local community. So we offer about 30 credits as a certificate, and then you can jump that to an associate's with a few extra classes here at KVCC. And from there, then we've partnered with Western as a STEP program, essentially. So you can get your fundamentals here and then move to Western and dive deep into the biology of brewing, the chemistry of brewing. And just recently, they've introduced a business degree in brewing. So our aspiring brewers, which we get a lot of that, now have a place to go to kind of learn the business side to, again, promote that sustainability from not only an environment, but a business aspect. So yeah, we're pretty excited, and we enjoy what we do here. Behind me, you'll see our brewery operations manager. He is squeegeeing the floor. We just got done making Belgian Saison flavored with hibiscus, lavender, and mint. So we brewed that. We threw it in the open top fermenter. We have a little open top fermenter in our brewery, and we're gonna let it ferment for the next 5 days and then use this in a lab for my Brew 170 class, the cellar operations, where the students will be able to sanitize a closed top bright tank, transfer the beer from the open top to the closed top, and then clean the open top. Is just a general practice on CIP and SIP here within our brewery. So Steve, anything to add? Ryan, you're one of our alumni along with myself in that first cohort. If you guys have anything to add that I forgot, feel free.
Yeah, it was a wonderful program, and yeah, I look back fondly on my days there, and it's very nostalgic to see the old brewery sitting there. Oh, even though it's pretty new.
Yeah, I guess I'll just emphasize that our degree programs are full bachelor's degrees. So opportunities for students that are tied to one of the most important economic drivers in the state. But with the rigor of well, on the science side, these are courses that pre-med students take. So there's some pretty some pretty significant learning that can be done. So if you know of anyone who's thinking about what to do in college, send them our way.
Awesome. Brian, did you cover exactly like the interesting choice of flavoring ingredients that went into that saison? If you did, I missed it. I was typing in the chat.
No, I didn't really go over the choice of it. So this is just a beer that, you know, we wanted to do a saison. We thought it'd go good with the hopefully upcoming spring. And really a lot of these beers that we brew personally, it's an experiment, right? So when a student asks me, hey, can I use mint in a beer? I'd be like, hey, we have a recipe that kind of, you know, can help you devise that recipe. Now the combination of lavender, hibiscus, and mint was basically just a little side lab we did in my Brew 100, where one of my lab assistants grabbed a bunch of spices from the culinary department downstairs and started just making concoctions. And we made this one with hibiscus, lavender, and mint, and it actually smelled pretty dang good. And so it seems kind of weird. And we were telling one of our culinary chefs about it. And he said, you know what, actually that is a classic cuisine in French cuisine, having not hibiscus, but having lavender, mint, and dates in their cuisine. And so with that, we ground up about 10 pounds of dates, and we're gonna throw that in the secondary fermentation as well. So we have a really cool collaboration here where we're on the second floor, our brewery, and on the main floor is our whole culinary department. So you not only have that thought process of a brewer, but we can throw a couple chefs in here and have them tell us what kind of cool combinations we have too. So it's a really fun, interesting program.
Very cool. I think Brooke has a question.
Yeah, thanks. This has been really great. And I'm wondering, Brian and Steve, how or if you bring in like the like how much about the barley do you bring into your students just process, like the variety, the tests, you know, the test results from either the malt or the barley quality, where it's grown, those kinds of things. Does that come into play at all?
So I'm a brewer to begin with, so never really was much into the malting, but I was assigned to teach this Brew 130 class where we do a deep dive into malting. And you know, now I'm kind of pushing more towards, man, I really want to be a maltster because it's a really interesting, I think, industry to be in. And so yes, with that, kind of how the class is structured is the first week of classes, we really talk about how barley is grown, different conditions, different varieties, why barley is grown in different areas, why we use it as brewers. And then we can move into the malting process and how that really relates to malting, you know, because really as maltsters, we're just allowing those seeds to grow and go through their natural phases and then stopping it. And so you can relate the actual growth and the types of barley to how and why we malt them, and then why we make these different types. And, you know, why do we use a certain type of barley to make Pilsner malt versus a certain type of barley to make a different type of malt? And then we get into the more boring stuff where we break down the C of A's and talk about, you know, here's a long list of all these different things that maltsters are testing and that we use. But, you know, what's really important? And there's a really great podcast, the MBA podcast, Understanding a Malt C of A, I believe, that I actually assign as a, you know, like kind of like a lit review almost, where it's like, you know, listen to this, relate to class, but it's a great talk about how you can really simplify these malt C of A's, because I think there is still a big vacuum of understanding in the brewing industry what a real malt C of A is and how beneficial these numbers are to us. So yeah, I've really gotten a passion for malting and learning about barley. In class, I'll grow a little field of barley in a little planter and stuff. And yeah, it's
Awesome.
Yeah, that
But-
EA podcast, Master Brewers podcast, I think is Joe Hertrick is the speaker about breaking down malt COAs. Very good. It's either 2 or 3 parts. I think it may even be available publicly for free if you Google it. Real quick, I dropped in the chat a link to an article from Brewbound about Lima Grain's partnership with Broin, another barley breeding firm. They released a barley variety called BC Leandra, which is part of their Flexi Malt TM program that purportedly uses a significant percentage less water to achieve full hydration and modification in the malting process. I don't know much, I don't really know anything about the biological mechanisms of how that's possible, but it was just made available information to me during the Craft Maltsters Guild conference, and then this article came out just a few days ago. So it's very new to me, but very exciting because that could drastically reduce the water consumption and ecological impact per pint of beer produced. Malting uses a huge amount of water, as most of us on this call probably know.
Would that also decrease the amount of energy needed to dry it back out again?
Definitely, yeah. So if going into the kiln at even 40% or even 35% versus 45-ish%, yeah, dry down time, the entire energy consumption of the entire malting process would be reduced. What impacts that has on field performance and agronomy as far as sprout resistance, I don't know. But again, I don't know the biological mechanism. Sorry, just reading a comment in the chat. Cool. Well, I don't think I had anything else that I wanted to talk about. The protein thing, the protein fluctuation thing with increased levels of CO2 is very, very interesting. As an aside, I actually was talking to a maltster here that's local to me yesterday, and he was wondering exactly how low is too low for protein, and he's got some winter barley that's rate at 9%, like 9.0%, and that I think is alarmingly low. But what I found, I malted wint malt before that was around 9.5%, and it produced an adequate level of enzymes to be able to self-convert in the brewing process. So adequate diastatic power, adequate alpha amylase levels. And from what I understand, it's variety dependent how that protein is allocated during modification, where it goes into enzyme synthesis and how much gets converted into FAN, free amino nitrogen. So there is such a thing as too low protein for brewing purposes. But that's a challenge we've seen with winter barley in Michigan too, is we struggle to get those protein levels high enough in certain areas. In this particular, it's the same grower that I worked with that had a low protein wint malt. So it might be something about his genotype and environment interaction going on there. So blindly calling for as low protein as possible isn't necessarily a good thing. But Tom, I think you dropped a comment in the chat about low protein observations in Ohio this year. Have you encountered any barley in the malt house that actually is too low in protein to give you adequate enzyme and FAN levels?
We didn't take the 9.2. It didn't. Our spec was 9.5 to 12.5, and so we had another grower. Actually, we didn't wind up taking the 10.4 either because, excuse me, the 10.6 because he unfortunately had a high dawn level that was, I don't know, 6 ppm, in that vicinity. Everybody else's dawn was less than 1 ppm, but the protein was lower than what our spec was. And so on one hand, because of COVID and the fact that nobody was buying much malt, on the other hand, because we had our major grower who came in, I think 10.2, almost no dawn. That's the barley we took. The rest of it went for feed. So we did not try to malt it.
Gotcha. Thanks. Yeah, my advice to the maltster I was talking to yesterday was talk to the grower and see if he was able to buy just like one super sack, logistics allowing, because transporting just one super sack of grain across an entire state's not economically great. But all right, I guess I have to give context here. So I know the grower, and he has family in Muskegon, which is local to us. And I was like, well, if time's not an issue and you can get Nate to deliver you one tote to try out, the proof is in the pudding, give it a try. Because the specs were all within his area of desirability for the malt house, except for he was concerned about that low protein. I was like, well, you can try it out. And I told him about my experience with Flint malt, where we were really concerned about having adequate enzyme levels, and it worked out okay. Although with that same barley, when we tried to develop higher color and more flavor, like trying to get like a Munich or like an English pale style malt out of it, it just wasn't possible because there wasn't enough crude protein there to drive those Maillard reactions and produce higher color. So like Brian was saying, some barleys are good, or the specs of some barleys are more conducive to producing Pilsner versus higher colored, darker malts. But yeah, I'm more of a trying to convince him to, like, well, give it a try. You might be surprised, but it also could be an unfortunate and unwelcome surprise.
Hey, Ryan, I have a question, and maybe it's a good wrap-up question. But Steve, I'm most curious about, like, what are the lowest hanging fruits in the whole, like, grain to glass? And Brian, feel free to jump in, or anybody else here. What are the lowest hanging fruits to contribute positively towards climate change in the, grain to glass process of beer? Like, where can we easily make progress?
You're asking, Brooke, about adapting your industry, not
No.
mitigating climate change.
No, I'm thinking more about mitigating.
Well, so in the end, this is a collective action problem, right? This is a global problem that no one country is going to solve. And so we need to, in the big picture, we need to start working on international agreements that have some weight. But for individuals, they're probably the two most effective changes of behavior that can help to mitigate climate change is related to diet and transportation. So not driving a car is probably the best thing you can do. Of course, that's not very practical, but driving an electric vehicle rather than an internal combustion engine vehicle is an individual or personal behavior change that you can do. And then eating low on the food chain. The amount of greenhouse warming that comes from our practice of raising meat contribute, the amount that contributes to global warming is kind of astounding. Both directly from methane emissions that result from animal husbandry, as well as all of the resources that go into raising the amount, raising meat. So those are the two, from the standpoint of personal behavior. Those are probably the two biggest changes that individuals can make. But I think that working while you're doing that, working on the collective action, we're not going to, necessarily work at the UN level, but at the local level, a lot of cities, states, counties are, and even regions, like there's a carbon pricing, carbon tax consortium in the Northeast that is a model that other parts of the country could have. So working within your local community to try and push for real collective action, in our case real policy moves to move our country away from fossil fuels and towards renewables, is what we need to do. I'm not sure if that's low-hanging fruit, but it's
what about more directly with the brewing process? Are there any like easy fix? I mean, nothing's easy, but in near future changes that might make a pretty big difference just down to the brewing process?
Well, as you are all aware, I'm sure as well, technology is advancing at a very alarming rate, not alarming, but at a very quick rate. And along with that, a lot of, some of this technology that was never attainable to us small breweries can now be. And so educating, I hate to plug the school here again, but education and talking about, what some of the consequences are to brewing. A lot of people don't realize that we don't need beer anymore, right? This is a luxury. And so when you talk about water scarcity, what's going to be potentially the first thing that gets cut out of the budget? It's, well, beer, right? But logistics, I think, is a big one. And Steve really hit on that, where, we're sending malt from across the world to here in Michigan, and we grow malt right down the street, and that's one of my bigger plugs at locality and finding a source of hops, malt right around the corner is, we're not adding more to the carbon footprint by sourcing right down the street. We're having a lot less, in my opinion. CO2 reclamation, that's a cool thing that I think is getting more and more attainable. I did a presentation at one point about putting flow meters on your water systems. So like, brewers love to use their hoses and just spray everything. Well, put a flow meter on there and limit them to 1 gallon per spray. And that's going to make them use a lot less water, right? Because they have to walk all the way over to the hose drop and reset their flow meter. So they're going to not spray down the entire place that they maybe didn't have to. So there's a lot of things we can do, but I think education and having conversations, people love to drink beer. Have a conversation at your brewery. Vivant Brewing Company up in Grand Rapids, they do a great job of pushing sustainability. What are we doing to make our earth better? And how are we able to, put more time and money back into our beer? Because look at what we're doing with sustainability and saving the world one beer at a time almost. So I think a big thing is, having the conversations and getting everybody in this collaborative effort to say like, hey, we do have a problem. It's coming up, and we've got to stop it now. And people love to have these conversations over beer, so why not start there?
Can I add a comment in here real quick, guys? This is Ned Berkey. President Biden signed an executive order 3 weeks ago directing USDA to involve the ag sector in the federal government's efforts, and highlights as it relates to renewable energy and carbon sequestration. Specifically, it directs USDA to collect input from farmers, ranchers, and other stakeholders on how to use federal programs to encourage adoption of climate-smart ag practices that produce verifiable carbon reductions and sequestrations and create new sources of income and jobs for rural Americans. And that's supported by Senator Stabenow, who you know is the new chairman of the Senate Ag Committee. So I think we're going to have more coming down the pike on this, hopefully.
And if I might dovetail what Brian said, hi, I'm Nick at Ethnology, but we've been looking at this. It's been on our radar for a long time. We'd like to be carbon neutral by 2030, which is it's a tall order for a brewery or a distillery, but CO2 is the largest output in any establishment. So if you can, especially as a brewery, you can capture it. And actually there's a lot of now systems that used to be multi-million-dollar systems like that Coors uses and Anheuser-Busch, but you can actually recapture your CO2. You can pipe it into a greenhouse. There's a lot of things you can do. And for us, it's about the point of contact from our farmers to our distillery. I mean, at 33 miles, you're really reducing that transportation, which is about 24% of the carbon, our CO2 gas house emissions is in that sector, in the transportation sector. And there are things like energy through your boiler and all these other things, but CO2 recapture is the one thing that is the largest greenhouse gas in any brewery or distillery. And that's, there's systems now that are in that $80,000 range. We're actually looking at, because we obviously don't input CO2 back for carbonation in a distilled spirit, but we're looking at how we can capture that and sell that to a larger brewery like Shorts, which is a block down the road, right? And then even reducing that that distance from where we're actually capturing the CO2 and then they're inputting into their beer. So there's a lot of ways you can do it, and hopefully there's government incentive and we can shift that paradigm and get really everybody thinking about, okay, maybe I can buy my malt local and buy my CO2 local, and we can do, there's a lot of ways we can work together collaboratively, if I can speak, collaboratively as an industry or as a sector, the beverage sector. So that's my 2 cents.
Hey guys, Parker Jones from MSU Extension sent out an article January 14th. What does the carbon impact look like on a food label? So that might be something if the craft beer industry wants to look into this with the MSU Product Center and actually put carbon on the label of craft beer. That might get all the hippies, so to speak, from my generation to buy more craft beer, huh? If that's possible.
Yeah, I love that idea, Ned. I think that's brilliant. And to emphasize your point, and to Brooke's question, that I think that there's a lot of room. There's a lot of room for carbon sequestration in our soils if we change our agricultural practices. I'm not sure how that could be done in the barley industry, but I think that it's definitely there's huge potential for carbon sequestration in the soils. So that might be, it's definitely something to be looking at as well.
You're absolutely right. Barley in our crop rotation gives us more opportunities to grow cover crops and so forth to sequester carbon. It's certainly a fit that makes sense to help. The other thing that I think this conversation is pointing to is we need consumers to value locally grown as well as locally made, right? I think locally made is easy to value, but my experience with farmers markets per se, consumers sometimes only care about one level deep of local, right? If a vendor is at a farmer's market and has some great tomatoes from Florida, right? They look great, awesome, I supported somebody local. But getting them to care, and maybe a label that points out like, hey, this barley or rye or whatever it was grown within 100 miles. It saved this much carbon, right? And it tastes better. maybe that's all woven together for multiple benefits.
You know,
So that's a great
when
point.
I suggest things like that, the cynics around me say, no one will make a purchase decision based on sustainability. It's going to be price only. And maybe I'm a starry-eyed idealist, which I'm the first to admit. But I'd like to see the data. Has anyone really done a systematic study asking that question?
Yes,
Going
Steve.
out.
Yes, Steve, they did. 2016 was
Tell me.
the Retailers Association did that. It was called the Millennial Study. And what it turned out is that, again, it was a very similar paradigm. Small group of people pay more for green, but the overall anticipation is that folks would prefer local, but would not pay more. That was what the determination was.
Michael, do you have a reference for that?
Yeah, that's the I'll send it to Ryan. It's the
Okay.
it's IRI. I forget what IRI stands for. 2016 Millennial Study. Millennial Purchasing Habits. Well, I'll see if I can find it. I'll send it to Ryan.
Sure. Send it over and I'll make sure Steve gets it.
Yeah, and I wonder if they've broken it down by generation, or if they were only looking at millennials.
Well, it was the folks who had money at the time, I guess, is one of the considerations. Well, you can see the data, but it was very similar to biofuels, and I still think it's very similar to biofuels today, where the percentage doesn't matter as much in the blend as long as it's in there. They just don't want to pay any more for it. But I think
it can't be digital, though. It can't be yes or no. I mean, people have to have a limit. Like, I'll pay, how much more would you pay? A quarter more for a pint if you knew that the barley came from a farm up in Muskegon? Would you pay 50 cents more? Right? There's got to be a limit.
I think Nick pointed out a good fact, though. It's really going to be this geographical distance. If you can shrink your supply chain, the fact is your neighbors are going to notice, and that is what the data says. So there's going to be the next question, and again, going back to the Maltefesto by Sugar Creek there, it's going to be a price thing until folks figure out that that's not going to be free. There's a premiumization that's necessary to deliver it. It'll be a little bit beyond the spice cabinet, and it'll be a bit more to the heart. Sorry, and I don't want to take up too much of the voice here.
Well, so I
agree that there comes a point too that what is the cost that we are killing our planet, and I think that will shift because we don't have a choice. I mean, we have to figure this out. I mean, it's the data is there. I mean, the writing's on the wall. So there comes a point where the cost is, the cost is far greater to not support local or not support a business that is at least doing their best to reduce their carbon output, their greenhouse gases. So, the study, I would say yearly, you're going to see a change based on the consumer sentiment will begin to shift to, well, if we don't buy local and, we don't figure this thing out, it's a very multifaceted, complex problem, but it's really simple. And if you break it down, but I think that consumers will eventually have to, because otherwise, what is the alternative? You can't buy beer on a dead planet. You can't enjoy a good bottle of booze on a dead planet either. So, I mean, the consequences will become far more severe than the economic costs associated with it. Eventually, as consumer sentiment changes, is my belief. I guess as my idealistic view of the
Yeah, but Nick, the unfortunate part is that we'd have generations that would pass that would without that desire. So it's going to take
Well, the
I'm
fact-
optimistic about the future.
Yeah, it is also an important role that we, and that breweries and distilleries they have the will, and they're still like us, a small entity like us, investing in a $70,000 CO2 capture system is not a small investment, right? But these are things that I believe is necessary for the perpetuation of not only our species, but also our industry. And so, it's interesting to see. I think that when you see a couple early adopters and first movers, and then you're going to get some more people that are going to come into the fray as well. But again, that's just my.
Yeah, so
One last thing, where I am down in Southeast Michigan, when we've talked to the manager of Whole Foods in Ann Arbor, which granted is its own little entity, 9 of 10 questions the manager gets are about quality. 1 question out of 10 is about price. So there is a select group of clientele willing to pay for quality and environmental sustainability. Is that enough? I don't know.
It's a valid point. There's certain things that I place a great value on price, and then there's certain things that I buy where I place way more value on quality. And Steve Jones from the Washington State University Bread Lab was talking about his overall finding as far as how we compare the value associated with bread versus beer. We don't want cheap beer or spirits. We want well-made, high quality, and we're willing to pay for it. But we do want cheap bread. We want affordable bread that's nutritious, and we don't want to pay an arm and a leg for it. And that's okay. So he's working on developing wheat varieties, bread specifically for that efficient bread production to make it available to as many people as possible and have as much nutrition as possible. But in terms of craft beverage production, we put a high value on quality there. And a side note to that, so that same maltster I was speaking with yesterday told me how he was called by a brewer that he's never sold malt to. He's tried and it didn't work out. The brewer called him the other day and said, "Hey, I was shorted or couldn't get delivery from Country Malt. I need 2 bags of this to be able to brew today." And he's like, "Can you help me out?" So Kevin's like, "Sure." And goes and delivers it to him personally that day, was able to save the brew day and everything. And he asked the brewer, he said, you don't have to tell me, but what do you pay per pound for your base malt? And the brewer's answer to him was alarming because it was not really significantly different than what this maltster pays or charges for his base malt. So in that particular instance, I was like, well, if he's not using craft malt, it's not because of price at this point, right? There must be some other reason. And that reason may just be that he doesn't know the difference in price. He hasn't bothered to look and just maybe assumes that craft malt's going to be outside of his reach in terms of price, but it isn't in that aspect. So when people make these decisions based on price, it may not even be really based on information. It may just be based on perception alone. So I think putting more information out there in education, as Brian said, could just be the tipping point for a lot of these folks. And then when you build in sustainability factors and total global cost over time, it's kind of a no-brainer. But I'm preaching to the choir here, right? Yep.
Can I just make one specific response to Nick?
Mm-hmm.
Capturing your CO2, it may be non-intuitive, but the only way that would benefit global warming is if you displace petroleum use. So most of the CO2 that breweries use is captured from the combustion of fossil fuels. And if they didn't capture it and pressurize it and send it out, they would just vent it into the atmosphere. So unless so you're actually it may not be a major consideration for you the climate benefit, because it probably isn't going to displace the petroleum-based CO2.
Yeah, re-release it once, that particular beverage is opened. But we're looking actually as an alternative, and actually a more cost-effective one, is into a greenhouse, where then plants can basically sequester naturally that CO2. So you could have a greenhouse that, and depending on the size of your operation, but yes, you're correct. It's, you're really just kicking the can down the road. And the brewing systems that are out there take it out of the atmosphere. I'm not really versed on that. But for us, we're looking at, possibly, is there a way to utilize the CO2 that we're using? But you are correct. We're not actually reducing our greenhouse output. We're just utilizing one of those outputs. But the greenhouse into an actual greenhouse for herbs is the route we're looking at that will actually naturally sequester CO2.
Guys, generically speaking, agriculture is a part of the solution, so we never want to downgrade our contribution to this versus the other industries that have a real problem. So ag is always part of the solution on carbon.
Very well said.
Some of the questions or the conversations I've been having with my growers are, more on the, like I said, on the plot. So like, what are we spraying? What is our carbon footprint to go out there and spray a herbicide or a pesticide? And so these are conversations that, and working within 33 miles, we have some more traditional, I would say, and I'm not using this in a derogatory term, but more old boy farmers, and they have their systems and they have their, their methods. But we, just having these conversations, what if we were certified organic, and, what would that do for our carbon footprint? Not only reducing the transportation from, within 33 miles of our distillery, but how can we have them reduce their fossil fuel consumption based on, the amount of sprays and the spray schedules, and what are we, and not only the environmental impact and the soil impact, and so those are just conversations that we're having, and we've seen a really, they're willing to listen, and for them they can sometimes save costs by not having to spray a herbicide or a pesticide or whatever it may be. So, and there are challenges that come with that on the harvest side as well, but it's just something that we're having. There's dialogue now about, not only how can we reduce our carbon footprint, but what is the best path moving forward for the next, 15, 20 years of our business, and the relationships that we have with these local farmers. So it's an interesting conversation and fascinating to see your guys' take on all of it as well.
It's another advantage of collaboration, because once you have enough buying power to influence the way your suppliers or growers work, then you can have an impact down the supply chain like that.
Nick, you ever thought about only serving folks that ride up on bikes or carpool?
We have not yet. We're not that established, but I think in the past that we've offered some like a discount if you rode your bike or something like that. But those are things that we're looking at in the future, is like, how can we incentivize versus we talked about having information on a label about your carbon footprint, or how the 33 miles is something that we initially, it was we wanted our spirits to have a local terroir. So that was the driving force, right? So we could represent Northern Michigan and capture the essence of our region and its soil. And, and then that became more, obviously it wasn't reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and our carbon footprint wasn't the number one driver. It was capturing Northern Michigan spirits and our region's terroir. That also became a positive result of that. But yes, I think there's two ways to look at it. You can incentivize and we can educate, which is a vitally important part of our business, but also I think in the future of brewers and distillers. But we can also provide incentive on the economic side, giving people discounts or so there's two sides to that. And yes, it's something we've considered as well. And it's something that in the future we'll probably do a little bit more of, or, have a day of the week where if you come up, if you walk or ride a bike or, an electric car or whatever, we'll, can offer a discount. We're also looking at, just and it's at this point, it's just signaling, I hate the word or the term virtual signaling, but it's, having electric car stations. It just lets people know that when you pull up to our establishment that we want to be part of the solution. And it may be subliminal that they see electric car charging station and, how often is it going to be used in the next couple of years? But as electric cars are more prevalent on the road and, but it's a signal that says, or a photovoltaic panel on the roof, the efficiency of it is not where we'd like to be, but we want to be part of the solution, and it lets our consumers know. And our market is ultra premium. I mean, that's where we want to be. And our, to counterpoint to whoever brought the point up earlier about the price, our consumers that we have attracted through, our marketing channels and our education and the way that we, our ethos really is more than willing to pay. It's mind blowing, to the point of where it's, it's inspiring that they'll let us really do whatever we want on the far as what I would consider playing around with unique substrates or, and that eventually will be passed down to the consumer and the cost, and they're happy to pay it. I mean, the clientele we deal with in Northwest Michigan, especially in this particular region, but, and people are actually happy to do it, from my experience, as long as you're educating them and you're conveying why that particular product, it's not just your carbon output or, the reduction in carbon, but it's, the distance, and you're communicating more than just that. So it's the full story, so that's just in our experience.
Hey, Michael, sometime you ought to have a summer tour, and Kelly Fox, Senator Stabenow's district representative?
I'm sure Mark does.
Yep. Kelly Fox is her Senator Stabenow's ag person. I mentioned that partly because she's already starting to work on the 2023 Farm Bill. And she was quoted as saying she wants to make sure Michigan is written on every page of the next Farm Bill. And she's working on the carbon aspect, partly with the President Biden and partly to benefit farmers. So
what's your last name? Was Kelly
Fox, Fox. I can send you her contact information, but like what Nick's doing would be a great stop on a tour for Kelly, or if you get the senator, that's the top dog, but you're probably not going to get her. But Kelly's the next best thing, and do a tour one day this summer or sometime.
Yeah, it wouldn't be, most of the stuff's going to be pretty virtual these days, I understand.
No, by this summer it won't be, I don't think. We'll be back to normal.
I'm glad you think so.
But
I did want to point out, though, I think Ned said it right, though, that ag touches every element of this, and agriculture is not a niche market. Craft barley for craft malt is a niche market. So what I'd like to say is that both technology and research really should be our, we need the data and this water data and everything. We need more data, but I think I'm kind of excited about reducing carbon footprint of soybeans and corn as well, which I think are really valuable crops to many people. But perhaps there's going to be an increase in automation and electrical automation in the fields, and I see it on the internet today. There's a Michigan of all places, we should be positioned for that autonomous battery driven thing, and we should be personally believe we should be the headquarters of that. I think other states probably will be ahead of us, but it would be really cool to be part of that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. We've had a good, productive conversation, and that's what it takes, is just everyone getting together and working together and talking together to solve these sorts of issues. Um, Great session. Next week, we'll have a maltster forum. So I know I'll see all the maltsters currently here on the call. You haven't failed me yet. So I'm going to beat the bushes and try and get the rest of the Michigan maltsters together, and we'll have a good, nice conversation next week as well. Thanks everybody again for being here, and cheers.